Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
It is Friday, and all of our guests today are brought to you by our friends from Campbell River, Quinsam Communications Group. Oh boy, a whole lot of submissions into the Delaney's OK Tire and Langley inbox. Just before we get to Thomas, I believe this is from Doug in Nanaimo. Sorry, Donnie, you can't teach grit, nastiness, sandpaper, or whatever you want to call it, in spite of what Tocchet thinks. That's in the player's DNA. When he said this team was soft, that's what they are. He called them soft after the Seattle game, and certainly that was most people would agree that was the case against the Kraken. Joining us now from The Athletic, Thomas Drance, just ahead of the Canucks against Philadelphia Saturday at Rogers Arena. You're laughing away there, Thomas. What's going on?
Doug in Nanaimo is beseeching the team to play grittier hockey. What's Gordon Port Hardy think? Let's wrangle up those opinions, Donnie. Come on.
We value our customers, Thomas. We value their opinions. Listen, they provide most of our content. Yeah.
Doug in Nanaimo being upset about the grit of his hockey team has got to be the most Canadian thing of the day. Like, we're not topping that, boys.
But what's your problem with it, Thomas? It's been an issue in the city for years. What's your problem?
I mean, I don't disagree when it comes to the forward group.
Yeah.
Right. But I also don't think it's this team's primary issue. This team's primary issue is actually a lack of speed. It's a lack of ability to move the puck. Right. That's the problem. But yeah, is this forward group, do they play hard enough? No, not consistently. So, yeah, I mean, I don't disagree so much as I think it's far from the main problem this team has. Sorry, Doug. Sorry, Gordon Port Hardy, too.
Oh, listen, you're right about it being very Canadian, and we're okay with that. Hey, yeah, Thomas, what do you know? What do you know about Thatcher Demko's health? We talked about it in the first segment. What do you know?
Not much yet, right? I think we'll have a better sense of it over the next 48, 72 hours. So, I don't want to sort of get off on a rant here or tie it to all of the issues that this medical staff has had or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But obviously deeply concerning considering the season Thatcher Demko has had, considering the season or the way his season ended last year. You never want to see a non-contact setback, right? Like, that's always deeply concerning to me, but we'll know more as the weekend unfolds.
Talk to Max Pacioretty about that. Hey, Thomas, your opinion of Artur Silov's NHL debut against the Rangers. What did you learn about him?
I loved, after the game, he was asked if he was nervous, and I'm sure he was. Mm-hmm. I'm sure he was. Who wouldn't be? And he said no. And he said it in a way that I believed him. and I like that. I thought that he did a really good job battling. I thought he did a really good job carrying himself like he belonged. And I think that stuff matters, right? I think the way that a goaltender carries themselves matters a ton, particularly given that, that can give confidence to a team. And certainly the opposite can rattle one. And, I thought, at the end of the day, against that New York Rangers offense, and they're immensely creative, and Doug in Nanaimo, gritty too, right? They combine an ability to play east-west with an ability to first win the battle in the trenches, making their skill game that much more dangerous. There were a couple moments where I'm sure afterwards, as he considers it, he'll learn from, he'll be a little bit wide-eyed about, that Zibanejad leg kick. I mean, this guy's never seen a consistent 40 goal scorer pull off a move like that before. And it's good to experience it. It gives you a taste of how hard you have to work and how good you have to be to stick at and excel in the NHL. And so, I have no problem with any of it. I like the way he carried himself. I like the way he battled. But, I don't think you're at a point yet where you should be counting on Artur Silovs to be your backup next season, right? If he crushes it in the AHL playoffs, maybe he's a consideration to be your third goalie. But realistically, this is still a developmental project for the club, and I thought that was clear too.
Thomas, 2 weeks today is the trading deadline. What's your gut saying? What's your gut saying about Besser and Schenn?
I mean, it's really tough. I think you've already crossed the point where you're able to trade Schenn in a way that wouldn't significantly destabilize his family. Like, I already think you've reached a point where it would be a very stressful situation for him and his wife if he were dealt. So, I don't love that. Like, I mean, I've been on this program hammering the table saying you got to do it. But at what point do you come up against the human concern of allowing a family to welcome a new child without relocating across the continent somewhere uncertain, right? I mean, frankly, you might have already passed that barrier, and yet in terms of the team's rational self-interest, he has to be dealt. So that's a really tough one for me to handicap. I still think it'll happen, but man, it makes me queasy, and I'm certainly not about to be advocating for it with the sort of tones that I have been over the past month. You would have loved to see it happen 2-3 weeks ago. Besser, look, I don't know if it's going to be possible to make that move. Like, I'm not saying it's not going to happen. I'm not saying the Canucks wouldn't be open to it. I think they'd be open to trading Besser and Garland and Myers. But let's be realistic here, right? We are living in a world where even the Bo Horvat trade had to be cap neutral, right? Even the Tarasenko deal involved the Blues taking back a salary and retaining half of Tarasenko's deal. Really hard to move money. I know there's a sort of a potential feeding frenzy for wingers with Patrick Kane and Timo Meier being sort of the bells of the ball. And maybe when the music stops, someone's still looking for a chair and the Canucks find a taker for a Besser type. But 6.66 with 2 years of term remaining after this one, that's going to be a really tough deal to move, considering how stuck, constipated the NHL trade market has been from a cap perspective all season.
Thomas, there's three guys I want to ask you about because young guys, do they have a future in Vancouver? Hoglander, Rathbone, and McDonough at Northeastern. This franchise needs draft picks. Would you move any of those three for picks?
Well, I think, Rick, just as a matter of risk management, that once a player declines to sign with you following their junior year and returns for their senior season of college hockey, at that point, in my view, they become a pretty significant signing risk and should be monetized as quickly as possible. That's just how I view risk management and the opportunity to go to August 15 free agency. The dynamics there.
Thomas, they met with him in January, had a good meeting. They want him. That doesn't sound like they want to trade McDonough. They want him.
Talk to David Poyle about his excellent meetings with Jimmy Vesey. Before the 2012 NHL deadline.
Go look at Abbotsford.
Rick,
go look at Abbotsford and tell me they don't need prospects.
No, I'm not saying they're not going to try to sign McDonough. They tried to sign McDonough.
Well, you just said that,
year, Rick. We know this. I know. Yeah. I didn't say that at all. You misunderstand me.
You just said that.
I didn't say they're not going to try and sign it. I said they should manage the risk that you encounter once a player goes back for their senior season, and it becomes extremely easy for them to simply withdraw from school before they graduate and hit unrestricted free agency on August 15. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying in terms of how you run it, you should probably deal them ahead of the deadline, because if, granted, I know the club has put in work in the relationship. I think they're confident, but I also don't believe that a decision has been made one way or the other. And I think in that situation, you take on an awful lot of risk. If you hold them past the deadline, you're better off trying to get something back instead, particularly given that this was a 7th round pick that sort of hit and now carries more value than a typical 7th round pick. If you were able to sign him, great. But I just think you're taking on a little too much risk to not move him before the deadline. Rathbone, I mean, this team clearly hasn't given him a shot, right? In fact, they've brought in multiple defensemen ahead of him in guys like Dermott, guys like Stillman over the course of the past year. Back to scoring goals in the American League now following a pretty significant injury this season. Guy can't catch a break. I still think there's a player there, or at least an interesting project there, but it just doesn't feel like he's going to get a fair shake here. I'm sure he feels that way. I would at this point. And, I don't know that the organization views it as a high priority prospect for them at this point. They're certainly not carrying themselves as if they do. However, you've sort of missed the window where you can trade him as like a real asset. Now he's kind of just a guy, right? Just kind of just a guy. And next year will require waivers. So, I don't know. I mean, that to me is a low priority one. If you can get something great. and Höglander. I mean, I'm curious to see, like, I think we'll know a lot more in 2 weeks about Höglander, not just because, if he's dealt, but whether or not he's called up after the deadline. He's only 2 games away from requiring waivers to go back down to the American League, right, Rick?
Yeah.
Which means that if he's on your NHL roster as you go past the trade deadline, he loses his eligibility to be in the American League playoffs, right? Like, he couldn't play for you or for Abbotsford in the Calder Cup playoffs if he's on your NHL roster, because you're not going to risk losing him on waivers just to paper him down to preserve his eligibility. So in 2 weeks, he can be recalled to the NHL while being eligible to compete in the AHL playoffs. I wonder if that development perspective is shaping why he didn't come up when Niels Oman and Vasily Podkolzin did. All of that said, I still sort of side-eye that decision, and I wonder if this team at some point looks at their surplus of wingers and thinks, hey, like, we might have to deal one of these guys for a defender or a center at a similar stage of their careers.
Where are you located right now? What city?
My house.
Which is, not to give it your address away or anything.
Oh, I'm in East Van. I'm in Mount Pleasant. I'll go to neighborhood. I'm in Mount Pleasant.
Thank you, Thomas in East Van. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Great job.
No, not quite as Canadian as Doug in
No, it's not.
My goodness.
It's not. If his last name was Mackenzie, that would be really Canadian.
Doug McKenzie in Nanaimo.
All right, Thomas in East Van.
Doug, I'm sorry for ripping you. Have a good one.
Thanks, Thomas. Talk to you next week.